In the heart of an ancient valley, where the mountains cast shadows longer than time itself, stood a monastery abandoned by both monks and memory. The air was colder here, not because of the wind, but because the earth itself refused to breathe, and no one remembered who built it or why the last bell ever rang. Travelers spoke of whispers that followed the wind down its ruined halls, whispers that were not echoes but reminders. When the sun fell behind the cliffs, even the stars seemed reluctant to look down upon it. Inside its decaying walls, moss-covered prayers carved in stone, words no one dared to read aloud anymore. The monastery had no gods left, only watchers. Legend said the valley had been cursed after the monks unearthed a relic, a mirror that didn't reflect the world, but the soul. Each monk who gazed into it vanished within 7 nights, leaving behind only their shadow, burned into the walls like smoke frozen in time. Now, centuries later, a wanderer approached. His name was lost to the past, his footsteps deliberate, his eyes unafraid, or perhaps too broken to feel fear. The night swallowed him as he stepped through the fallen gates. The wind stopped. The valley listened, and somewhere deep inside the monastery, the mirror remembered him. The wanderer lit a single oil lamp, its trembling flames slicing faint light across stone corridors lined with prayer wheels long rusted into silence. The air was thick, dense with centuries of decay, and the scent of something older than dust, something alive. Each step he took awakened echoes that weren't his own. The halls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as though the monastery still possessed a pulse. Strange symbols marked the walls, carved by trembling hands. Their meanings eroded, but their intent unmistakable. Warnings that he followed the faint outline of a trail, guided by instinct and something else. A pull from the dark that felt almost familiar. The monastery wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. As he reached the central sanctum, the air grew colder, heavy with the memory of devotion turned to despair. There, beneath a collapsed dome, he saw it, the mirror of Karth. It stood untouched by time, its silver surface gleaming faintly though no light reached it. The wanderer approached. The lamp flickered violently, shadows twisting across the floor in unnatural patterns. Some moved when he didn't. The silence pressed closer, suffocating. That he looked into the mirror. There was no reflection, no face, only darkness that breathed, coiling and retreating as if studying him in return. Then, for the briefest moment, a handprint appeared on the inside of the glass. Old, distorted, smeared by something black and liquid. His lamp extinguished. The chamber plunged into darkness, and from within the silence came the faintest whisper, soft, feminine, almost tender. "You've come back." The wanderer stood frozen, unable to tell if the voice had come from the air or from inside his mind. Outside, the moon vanished behind the mountains. The monastery, once still, began to hum again, as though an ancient promise had just been remembered. By dawn, the valley lay beneath a veil of pale mist, yet inside the monastery, time no longer followed light. The wanderer's lamp had gone cold, but the mirror's faint gleam pulsed like a living eye. He awoke, or thought he did, beside the cracked altar. His hands were trembling, though the cold was not what made them shake. There were marks on his palms now, faint but growing darker. 5 thin lines, as though pressed by invisible fingers. He could hear something behind the walls, breathing. Not the wind, not an animal. It was the slow rhythm of something ancient remembering how to exist. Each exhale was accompanied by a low hum, almost human, echoing through the corridors like a chant buried in stone. He moved deeper into the monastery, drawn by a sound that was not sound at all, a vibration beneath the floor, a resonance that matched the beating of his own heart. The more he listened, the more it aligned with him, until he couldn't tell if the sound came from within or without. In a side chamber, he found murals half buried beneath soot. Figures painted in ash and blood depicted monks kneeling before the mirror, their faces stretched into terror as something invisible crawled out of the glass toward them. The last mural showed the mirror cracked, and from its fractures, dozens of shadowed hands reaching outward, clutching at the world. The wanderer stepped closer, tracing one of the painted lines, and felt warmth beneath his fingers. The wall was breathing. The painted eyes blinked. He stumbled back, heart pounding, but when he looked again, the murals were dry, lifeless stone. The monastery was silent, yet the whisper returned, closer now, coiling against his ear like a secret meant only for him. You tried to forget me, but I never left. He ran his hand over his chest. His heartbeat wasn't his own anymore. It throbbed in rhythm with the faint, pulsing glow from the distant sanctum. The mirror was calling, and somewhere deep inside his mind, a memory began to stir, one he didn't remember having. The wind outside had stopped entirely, as though the valley itself feared to intrude. The monastery was no longer stone and silence. It had become a labyrinth of shifting echoes and forgotten faces. The wanderer found himself walking through corridors that no longer matched the ones he had entered. The air shimmered faintly, bending light into shapes that resembled doorways, moments, memories. That he turned a corner and stopped. Before him lay a long hall lined with candles, their flames unnaturally still. At its end, a massive mural glowed faintly, not with paint, but with memory. He saw monks in saffron robes, chanting around the mirror. Their voices formed a rhythm that filled the air, echoing through his bones. But the monks were not praying. They were binding. Their hands trembled, their eyes hollow, as the mirror's surface swirled with smoke and the faint outline of something unspeakable pressed from within. It wanted to come through. The wanderer blinked, and the image shifted. Now he stood among them. His hands were bound in the same red cord. He could smell incense and decay, the scent of burnt herbs and fear. His own voice joined the chant, not willingly, but as though memory itself had taken control of his mouth. That he wasn't an intruder. He was one of them. The realization struck him with a violence deeper than fear. He had been here before, centuries ago, when the ritual had gone wrong. In his mind, the mirror's voice returned, layered with 1,000 whispers, each one his own. You sealed me once. You left me here, but I kept a part of you. He looked down at his hands. The marks had deepened into scars, black veins threading toward his wrist, pulsing faintly. The monastery wasn't cursed by accident. It was his doing. He had been the last monk who dared to use the mirror to see beyond the self. But what he saw had seen him back, and it never forgot. The sanctum's glow returned, brighter now, as though sensing his awakening memory. The mirror no longer needed summoning. It was already awake, and it was hungry. By nightfall, the monastery had shifted again. The halls stretched longer. The doors led to rooms that shouldn't exist, and the air felt thick, like walking through the breath of something sleeping just beneath the surface of the world. The wanderer's lamp had long gone out, but light still followed him, faint, flickering, coming not from fire but from reflections. Every wall, every shard of glass, every puddle of water began to shimmer faintly, as though the mirror's consciousness had fractured into countless pieces. He passed a row of broken statues, monks carved in stone, faces contorted in terror. But when he looked closer, he saw that they weren't carved. They were petrified, real flesh, frozen mid-scream. The monastery's last prayers. Something shifted behind him. The sound of feet dragging, soft, deliberate, close. He turned, but nothing moved. Only the faint impression of figures in the dust, like footprints fading backward into time. His own shadow began to stretch unnaturally across the wall, splitting at the edges, forming multiple shapes that didn't follow his movement. They watched him, outlines of himself that tilted their heads at different angles, curious, almost alive. From the depths of the hall came a slow hum, the same rhythm he had felt under his skin since the first night. But now it was louder, surrounding him, filling his lungs, syncing his heartbeat with the monastery's pulse. The walls bled black moisture. The air vibrated. He stumbled forward into a chamber he didn't remember existing. Inside stood rows of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of himself. Younger, older, wounded, hollow-eyed, screaming, silent. Every reflection moved a split second too late, as though each was trapped in its own moment of time. And in the center stood the original mirror, the one from his past life. Its surface rippled, alive. Inside it, a figure stood. Himself, cloaked in the robes of an ancient monk, eyes sunken, hands marked with the same scars. But the reflection smiled first. The surface of the mirror rippled outward, like a pond touched by unseen hands. The figure inside began to step forward. The air broke. The monastery groaned. The candle flames outside went out one by one. And then the whisper came again, not gentle this time, but cold and infinite. I am what you buried to become human. The mirror cracked, not with sound, but with silence so loud it hurt. The wanderer fell to his knees as his shadow detached from him, rising slowly to stand upright, its shape identical to his own, but its eyes glowing with an ancient, pitiless calm. The monastery had found its lost monk again. The ground shuddered beneath his knees as the air thickened into something almost tangible, heavy, wet, breathing. The monastery's stones began to tremble as if waking from a centuries-long dream. Dust rose like ash, forming shapes that flickered in and out of existence. Faces of the monks who had once lived here, their features twisted between agony and worship. The wanderer, or what remained of him, could no longer tell where his body ended and the monastery began. Every wall pulsed faintly, veins of black energy spreading outward from the shattered mirror. The shadow that had broken free of him stood tall, its presence bending light, distorting space. It was not just a reflection. It was his memory given flesh. The monk he had been, the part of himself that had chosen the forbidden ritual, now reborn from the mirror's hunger. The shadow stepped closer, its movements deliberate and patient, like a god savoring the return of dominion. As it moved, the petrified monks began to crack open. From within their stone husks seeped dark vapor, curling into the air and vanishing into the shadow's form. It was reclaiming its followers. The wanderer tried to move, but the monastery held him. The floor beneath his hands was warm now, beating faintly, like skin over a buried heart. His breath came in short bursts, each exhale turning to mist that drifted upward and disappeared into the ceiling. The walls around him shifted, twisting until the entire corridor curved inward, forming a circular chamber, a heart chamber. And at its center, the cracked mirror began to heal itself, fusing back together, sealing with black light. That he realized the monastery wasn't a ruin at all. It was alive, a living being built around the mirror to contain it. Every stone was a cell, every hall a vein. The monks hadn't built it to worship. They had built it to imprison. Now that he had returned, the prison no longer needed walls. It only needed him. The shadow turned toward him and stretched out its hand. The voice that came wasn't external. It was inside him, whispering through his veins. We were never two. We are the same memory, split by fear. He felt his mind fracture, old sensations bleeding through, chanting in darkness, the scent of burning incense, the sound of screaming wind as the mirror opened centuries ago. He saw himself kneeling before the mirror, trembling as something vast and formless reached out, offering him a bargain. Eternal knowledge in exchange for eternal return that he had accepted. And this endless rebirth, was the cost. The shadow stepped closer, its fingers brushing his chest. The heartbeat beneath his ribs stopped. For one perfect, horrifying moment, he felt nothing. No breath, no sound, only infinite stillness. And then, the monastery exhaled. The lamps ignited on their own, bathing the chamber in crimson light. The shadow dissolved into smoke, spiraling into his body once more. The marks on his skin spread, forming black veins that pulsed faintly like rivers of ink. The mirror, now whole again, reflected him, but this time it smiled with him. The monastery had its master back. The monastery stood silent beneath a bruised sky. Dawn should have painted the peaks gold, but instead, a dull gray light bled through the clouds, casting the mountains in hues of ash. From the cliffside, the world looked sick. Rivers shimmered with a black tint, trees bent in the wind though no storm moved them, and far below, villages flickered faintly, as if wrapped in a trembling mirage. The wanderer, or what was now a vessel, stepped out from the monastery's entrance. The wind no longer chilled him. It moved around him like a living thing, whispering in voices only he could hear. The air itself seemed aware of him. Every footstep echoed longer than it should have, as if the earth were listening that he looked down at his hands. The black veins beneath his skin pulsed slowly, each beat syncing with a rhythm that wasn't his own. It was the monastery's heartbeat, now pulsing through him. He could feel the world, as though its surface were his flesh and its storms his breath. That he reached into his satchel, pulling out the fragments of parchment he'd carried from the ruins. Symbols, names, spells. But now, they rearranged themselves before his eyes, the ink sliding like living serpents, forming new words, in a language he did not recognize but somehow understood. The reflection must return to its origin, for the mirror has no side, only hunger. He whispered the line aloud, and the air trembled. Far below, in the nearest village, glass began to hum. Windows, mirrors, even still water vibrated softly, reflecting not the villagers' faces, but his. The reflection spread like infection that a woman fetching water from a well gasped as her reflection blinked, a heartbeat too late. A child cried out when the mirror in his home whispered his name. The elders gathered in the square, crossing themselves, murmuring prayers that turned to vapor midair. And then, one by one, the reflections began to step forward, not shattering. Emerging, pale versions of the living crawled from their mirrored prisons, their eyes void of life, but filled with knowing. For every person in the village, a double stood before them, silent and waiting. The wanderer felt it all. Every reflection, every awakening. Each new form was a pulse in his chest, the mirrors were expanding through him. He staggered, gripping the stone railing as his vision blurred. The monastery behind him pulsed in rhythm with the spreading reflections, its glow faint but growing stronger with each passing second. That he realized, with dawning terror and awe, that the curse was not revenge. It was restoration. The mirror's world, a world made of reflection, was bleeding into this one, reuniting what had been split apart ages ago. The monks had sealed it away because they feared the merging, the end of distinction between truth and illusion. But now, he had undone their work. He raised his eyes to the horizon. Beyond the valley, faint lights flickered across distant lands, cities, rivers, oceans, each one blooming like black fire as the reflection spread. For the first time, he smiled, not out of joy, but resignation. The voice returned inside him, calm, almost soothing. It was never your curse. It was your creation. He turned back toward the monastery. Its gates were open now, waiting, and from within came the faint echo of chanting. The same melody he had once sung, centuries ago. That he stepped forward, the mountain trembling beneath his feet. The reflection of the world followed him, vast, unstoppable, inevitable. The merging had begun. The merging began not with thunder, but with silence. That a silence so deep that even thought seemed to pause. The world, both of light and reflection, hung suspended in a stillness that stretched across time itself. Then, slowly, reality began to bend. Rivers curled upward into the sky like serpents of liquid glass. Mountains folded inward, their shadows turning solid. Every mirrored surface in the world rippled as if awakening from an ancient dream. And at the center of it all stood him, the wanderer, now barely human, veins glowing like molten ink beneath translucent skin. He looked around the monastery, though it was no longer a monastery at all. The walls shimmered, no longer stone but a surface that reflected endless versions of himself, standing, watching, whispering. It was like being inside the body of the mirror itself. The chants grew louder. He turned toward the great hall, where the last of the monks had once sealed the artifact. The doors, though made of reflection now, opened at his thought. Inside was no temple, but a vast void of shimmering light. The mirror stood in the center, floating, its surface smooth and black as the heart of night. And within that darkness, a shape moved out, a woman's outline first, shifting into a man's, then into something neither, both ancient and fluid, a being without a defined form. Its voice was 1,000 whispers layered as one. You came back to where it began. The wanderer's throat was dry, but words escaped him. I never knew what I was freeing. You freed yourself. Long ago, you were the one who sealed us, your reflection and ours. You feared the unity of truth and lie. The being moved closer, every step rippling the world around them. The faces in the mirrored walls trembled, some smiling, some weeping. The mirror is not a curse, wanderer. It is memory. We were once one world, thought and shadow, dream and waking, reflection and flesh. But man wanted difference, and so he carved himself apart from what he was. The wanderer's eyes burned. The memories flooded in, flashes of another age, cities of silver, people walking through walls of water, time folding like paper, and himself, not as a mortal, but as a creator, crafting the mirror as a safeguard against something greater. You built the mirror to divide truth from illusion, the voice continued. But in doing so, you created both. Without one, the other rots. He fell to his knees. Then why bring me back? Why not let this world die? The being leaned close, its face now identical to his. Because you are the balance. You are both, the creator and the reflection. You made this fracture. Only you can choose to end it or to merge it again. The void trembled as it spoke. The reflections of himself on the walls began to bleed. Literally bleed. Black fluid running down the mirrored surfaces, pooling at his feet. The monastery's bells, long buried in dust, began to ring without touch that he rose slowly. And if I choose the merge, then all will become one. No truth, no lie, no life or death, only reflection, endless, perfect. And if I choose to end it, then you erase everything, both worlds. The mirror will crack, and both sides will fade into nothing. He looked into the blackness, his own reflection staring back, but this time, it smiled before he did. The sky outside split like shattered glass. Cities dissolved into their own reflections. Oceans became mirrors. The choice was upon him that he whispered, "Then I choose." The mirror pulsed once, brighter than a sun, as the decision was made. And in that blinding instant, the world began to rewrite itself. The merging began not with thunder, but with silence, that a silence so deep that even thought seemed to pause. The world, both of light and reflection, hung suspended in a stillness that stretched across time itself. Then, slowly, reality began to bend. Rivers curled upward into the sky like serpents of liquid glass. Mountains folded inward, their shadows turning solid. Every mirrored surface in the world rippled as if awakening from an ancient dream. And at the center of it all stood him, the wanderer, now barely human, veins glowing like molten ink beneath translucent skin. He looked around the monastery, though it was no longer a monastery at all. The walls shimmered, no longer stone but a surface that reflected endless versions of himself, standing, watching, whispering. It was like being inside the body of the mirror itself. The chants grew louder. He turned toward the great hall, where the last of the monks had once sealed the artifact. The doors, though made of reflection now, opened at his thought. Inside was no temple, but a vast void of shimmering light. The mirror stood in the center, floating, its surface smooth and black as the heart of night. And within that darkness, a shape moved out, a woman's outline first, shifting into a man's, then into something neither, both ancient and fluid, a being without a defined form. Its voice was 1,000 whispers layered as one. You came back to where it began. The wanderer's throat was dry, but words escaped him. I never knew what I was freeing. You freed yourself. Long ago, you were the one who sealed us, your reflection and ours. You feared the unity of truth and lie. The being moved closer, every step rippling the world around them. The faces in the mirrored walls trembled, some smiling, some weeping. The mirror is not a curse, wanderer. It is memory. We were once one world, thought and shadow, dream and waking, reflection and flesh. But the light consumed everything. There was no sound, no weight, no air, only a blinding whiteness that felt infinite. For a moment, existence itself seemed to forget that it ever had form. Then, slowly, the whiteness began to recede. Shadows gathered, shapes formed. The world breathed again, but it was not the same world. He stood at the edge of a vast plain of liquid glass. The sky above shimmered like oil on water, both luminous and dark at once. Mountains were no longer made of stone but of mirrored crystal, reflecting thousands of suns that hung motionless in the air. Rivers ran backward and forward simultaneously. Every step he took echoed twice, one sound in the air, another from beneath the surface of his reflection, that he was inside the new reflection. The choice had not destroyed nor merged the worlds. It had rewritten the law between them. Truth and illusion no longer existed as opposites. They bled into one another like ink in water. Reality had become fluid, shaped by thought, emotion, and memory. That he looked at his hands. They were still his, but when he turned them, he saw other versions flickering over them. A child, an old man, a monk, a warrior. Every life he had ever lived, every reflection he had ever been, now existed together. That a faint hum rippled through the glass plane. The horizon shifted, bending like a liquid lens. From its depths, something began to rise, tall structures of light and metal, moving as if alive. It was a city, forming itself from reflections. Towers built by memory, streets shaped by echoes of footsteps long gone. The center of the forming city. A single structure grew higher than all others, a column of mirrored stone spiraling into the sky. At its top, suspended in the air, was the mirror, no longer black, but glowing like liquid mercury. That he walked toward it, feeling time ripple around him. Every step brought fragments of forgotten voices, laughter, sorrow, the pulse of 1,000 lives overlapping. As he neared the tower, he realized something. The beings from both sides had begun to appear. Humans and their reflections stood face to face, identical yet not the same. Some smiled as if reunited with long-lost kin. Others screamed, unable to bear the sight of themselves. The air was thick with confusion, awe, and terror, and through it all, the mirror pulsed softly, keeping balance between chaos and creation. When he reached its base, the mirrored being, the one who had once spoken to him, emerged again, but now it was less alien. Its form flickered between shapes until it stabilized as him. Not a copy, not a twin, but the other half, calm and unbroken. You chose balance, it said, its voice blending with the wind. Not to end, not to merge, but to renew. He nodded, understanding more through feeling than thought. The mirror had not demanded destruction or perfection, it had asked for recognition. For the two halves to see each other without fear, the being continued. This world will learn to live in truth and illusion both. Every reflection will walk beside its source, but it will not be easy. Some will break, some will adapt, some will vanish entirely. This is the price of rebirth. He looked at the horizon again, cities spreading endlessly, sky fracturing into patterns of silver veins. He could feel every mind, every heartbeat, as if they were reflections inside him that he whispered to the being. And me? What am I now? You are the anchor, it replied. The line between the mirror and what it reflects. As long as you exist, both worlds remain real. He stood silently, gazing into the distance where dawn and dusk met in the same sky. He had become the balance between the seen and the unseen, the guardian of the new reflection. But somewhere deep within the endless glass, a faint crack whispered, a sound too small to notice, yet sharp enough to echo forever. The world was reborn, but not flawless. The mirror, though renewed, still remembered what it once broke. And in that memory, something stirred again. Man wanted difference, and so he carved himself apart from what he was. The wanderer's eyes burned. The memories flooded in, flashes of another age, cities of silver, people walking through walls of water, time folding like paper, and himself, not as a mortal, but as a creator, crafting the mirror as a safeguard against something greater. You built the mirror to divide truth from illusion, the voice continued. But in doing so, you created both. Without one, the other rots. He fell to his knees. Then why bring me back? Why not let this world die? The being leaned close, its face now identical to his. Because you are the balance. You are both, the creator and the reflection. You made this fracture. Only you can choose to end it or to merge it again. The void trembled as it spoke. The reflections of himself on the walls began to bleed. Literally bleed. Black fluid running down the mirrored surfaces, pooling at his feet. The monastery's bells, long buried in dust, began to ring without touch that he rose slowly. And if I choose the merge, then all will become one. No truth, no lie, no life or death, only reflection, endless, perfect. And if I choose to end it, then you erase everything, both worlds. The mirror will crack, and both sides will fade into nothing. He looked into the blackness, his own reflection staring back, but this time, it smiled before he did. The sky outside split like shattered glass. Cities dissolved into their own reflections. Oceans became mirrors. The choice was upon him that he whispered, "Then I choose." The mirror pulsed once, brighter than a sun, as the decision was made. And in that blinding instant, the world began to rewrite itself. The reborn world glimmered, vast, fluid, and alive. But beneath its luminous surface, silence had begun to twist a T first. It was a small distortion. A shimmer at the corner of sight, where reflections no longer matched their sources. A shadow that blinked half a second too late. The humans and their mirrored selves had learned to coexist, to walk the same cities, breathe the same air. Yet harmony was never meant to last forever. Balance, after all, is only peace pretending to be still. The anchor, once human, now something greater, watched from the highest tower of the mirrored city. The horizon gleamed like liquid silver, but he could feel it, the pulse beneath the glass. Uneven, strained. Something inside the mirror was remembering too much. Every reflection carried a trace of its past, a fracture, a hunger. Those fragments were now whispering to each other, like ghosts assembling from memory. The anchor closed his eyes, and for the first time since rebirth, he felt fear. Across the plains, the mirrored oceans began to tremble. Their surfaces rippled, distorting faces and forms. Towers reflected the wrong skies. Birds made of light froze mid-flight, their images hanging like still photographs. Then came the sound, a low, echoing crack, the same one he'd heard at the end of creation. The mirror, the heart of the new world, was splintering. He descended the tower, his steps echoing through the fractured halls of mirrored glass. Every surface reflected infinite versions of him. The anchor, the child, the detective, the wanderer, each flickering between truth and illusion. They watched him silently, as if waiting for a choice he hadn't yet made. At the mirror's base, he saw it. The fracture had widened, a black vein running across its surface like ink bleeding through silk. And from within that crack, something moved. It wasn't light. It wasn't shadow. It was absence, a pure void that consumed reflection itself. Wherever it touched, the world unmade. Faces vanished, shapes dissolved, leaving only flat emptiness behind. The anchor reached out his hand. The surface of the mirror was cold, trembling like a dying heartbeat. And then it spoke again, the same voice as before, but fainter now, as if speaking from across eternity. Balance cannot exist without chaos, and chaos remembers. He understood. The mirror was not evil, it was alive. It had carried every memory of both worlds, every lie, every truth, every reflection that ever was. It remembered betrayal, fear, war, and even renewal. But in its memory, it had also kept doubt. And now, that doubt was becoming reality. He looked around. The city above him began collapsing in silence, towers folding inward as if swallowed by invisible waves. The beings, humans and their mirrored selves, screamed as their bodies faded, reflections dissolving into blank glass. He had one choice left. The mirror pulsed one last time, offering him a path. Not survival, but completion. If he gave himself completely to the mirror, he could absorb the fractures, seal the void, and let the world continue. But he would cease to exist. No consciousness, no identity, just an eternal pulse between reflection and truth. If he refused, the mirror would collapse, and both worlds, the real and the reflected, would vanish into nothing. He stood there for a long moment. The weight of creation pressed against him. Every scream, every tear, every heartbeat depending on a single choice. He took a breath and stepped into the mirror. The surface swallowed him whole. Light shattered, darkness folded inward, and then silence. For an instant, everything stopped. The reflection and the real fused perfectly, one final heartbeat of balance. The void screamed once and disappeared, and when the silence broke, the world breathed again. In no longer mirrored, in no longer divided. Just real. The mirror was gone. The tower had vanished. The plains were quiet and whole, filled with wind and sky. Simple, imperfect, alive, and in the faint reflection of a still pond nearby, a single figure lingered, not as flesh, not as shadow, but as a flicker of memory. Watching, the last trace of the anchor, the one who balanced the truth and the illusion, and in doing so, became both twist and truth. The reflection ended, but the echo remains.